Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1374. At the bottom of the page of close to the bottom of the page of 1374. And briefly, what are we learning? The Rebbe Rashab is now explaining essentially the essential purpose, the essential role of Torah in giving us the guidance and direction, the blueprint. Torah from the word Hera, directive, of how to live our lives, how to align our lives to the God's plan, basically like, think of it, life's operator's manual, aligning the machine of life and existence to the plan of the architect and the cosmic engineer, and how to transform the world and actualize its very purpose, which we know he doesn't state it explicitly here, but throughout Chassidus, to make a dira b'tachtein, to take the material world and make it a home for God, which is not a simple process because you're dealing with a material world, a mortal, limited, flawed world, even a world of sheker, of deception, of duplicity, of lies, of corruption, selfishness, self-interest, and far worse even, as we know how bad it can get, the hostility, bad wars, inhumanity, injustices. So without saying all these words, but that's really what we're talking about, is transforming that world into a world of Mashiach, a world of a beautiful garden as the way God intended it when he created the world in the first place. So hypothetically, human beings, you could say we rely on their conscience and on their instincts to figure it out. But first of all, the fact is we also have other tendencies in us and other challenges, and we may not always live up to our highest standards. Secondly, we're subjective. Even at the best, we can only reach that far. And thirdly, we are diverse. Everybody has different approaches. And you see, even with the Torah, even with guidelines, it's not that easy to live up to the highest levels of morality and ethics and spirituality and goodness and kindness. Because we also have an animal soul. And we have the subjective interests. God did not make it easy. But at the same time, he also gave us a divine soul and gave us also divine instincts. But above all, he gave us the Torah. That was the gift. He gave us his Torah. So he gave us an actual book, an actual body of literature. I mean, I don't think that's the right word, literature. And actually, his wisdom and his will documented. Anon nafshik sovis yahavis. Anoichi, the first word of the Ten Commandments, is the acronym that I have engraved my spirit in these words. I've instilled and imbued them with my spirit. So he gave us a piece of himself, like an artist would give us what is going on in his mind. As I said before, the cosmic engineer's mind, so to speak. Can't talk about God as a mind, but as closely as we can. God did create the world with intelligence, and he told us how he did it and why he did it. And above all, what to do to fulfill what he wants us to do in this world. So this is a tremendous gift, because how could we ever figure out what God wants if he didn't tell us and communicate it? So yes, it does say in the Gemara that we would have learned tznius, modesty, from a cat if the Torah was not given. Ilmole le'nitna Torah, it says. If the Torah was not given, the Rebbe Rashab adds, Chaz v'shalom, God forbid, we could have learned modesty from nature and other virtues and other attributes and other qualities from different parts of the natural world. But as I said, that would still have been limited. But now with the Torah, you have the full picture and the full expectations. It's like when you hire someone, what are your expectations of me? The Torah tells us exactly its expectations. And it gives us the strength to live up, like we always say whenever God gives a commandment, he also gives us the strength to fulfill that commandment, to fulfill that guideline, that order. That's the Torah in general terms. And the words that we've been learning, this is called emes. Torah is emes. Torah is emes. The truth. It's telling us God's higher truth and how to bring that truth into a world that's not necessarily a truthful world in every possible way. So that's what Chochma is, Chochma Birur be'etzem. Now you say mathematics, lahavdil, or science, or biology, or other schools of thought are also wisdom. No one's taking away from it. But firstly, they're human wisdom. We're not understanding God's mind and understanding God's nature. But the human being's effort is human wisdom. It's not like Torah wisdom, which has therefore its limitations. And therefore, also, and secondly, it's not necessarily telling us the purpose of creation. As I pointed out a number of times, science will dissect nature, the anatomy of nature, and give you the best we can through human observation, but existence, understanding the purpose of existence, and not understanding where it all came from and where it all originated from. The Torah, on the other hand, tells us what God's intentions are with creation. Not just that it consists of subatomic particles or DNA or cells, and the wisdom behind that, and how we can create different healing agents, and how we discover different technologies. That's all in the human capacity. That's also a blessing we were given. When we talk about the pure wisdom, Chochma Birur be'etzem, what he calls Chochma Losh and Nikra Emes, Emes the Avaya b'Chochma, that's the Torah. And in essence, it continues on that this is the Kava Yesha. This is straight, clear, crystal clear, and doesn't have inclination. It's not defined by we'll call it the complexion, and the right and left, and the structure of existence. That's why Sefer Bereshit is called Sefer HaYoshar, because the Sheresh Shemakar HaTorah, the way it is before, it defined in structure. Where's the structure of Torah? Where's Torah meet structure, rather? That's in the 4 books that come after Bereshit. That's the mitzvahs. That is already God telling us, here's what I want you to do. The Taryag mitzvahs that break down into 613, 248 positive, 365 negative, and each one dealing with another aspect of existence. And this is kosher, and this is not kosher, this is pure, this is impure. But Mashenk is, that's in Dalet Sfarim, where there's the mitzvahs of Kav Yamin v'Smeil. And you need that as well, because you want to bring the Torah, as I said, into a world of structure. You don't want it to remain just in this oneness of God's emes and truth. You want that truth to permeate the details of existence, every aspect of existence. Mashenk is Sefer Bereshit she'ein by mitzvahs harizel l'mayla mischalkus. And yet, Mashenk is Sefer Bereshit is higher than the structure like we discussed yesterday. It's more like they're telling us the mission, laying out the building blocks. And then the 4 books afterwards, Shmois, Vayikra, Bamidbar Dvarim, talk about how to implement it, or the actual implementation of it. You know, after Mitzrayim, they come Matan Torah, Mishpatim, the laws, building a Mishkan, and everything that follows, all the different mitzvahs in Torah. And yet, Sefer Bereshit is also a Sefer. It's not just completely beyond it all. It's called Sefer HaYoshar, because it's also Amshacha, Kav HaYesher. So it's a Kav, a straight line. It's also Amshacha, not beyond. It's not beyond existence. It's just in Amshacha is the first step, like the Klal. And he explains that there's the 3 Kavim: the Kav HaYamin, the right side, the left side, and the Kav HaMtzai. Torah is the Kav HaMtzai, which is higher than the actual diversity or the distinction between right and left, and actually encompasses them and joins them together, like we discussed. The Kav HaMtzai, Mimine Eish Das Lomei. Yeah. So what do we know from this? That also the 4 books of Torah are also part of the Kav HaMtzai, but there the focus is the Kavim, how the very right and left are all united together. Whereas in Sefer Bereshit, the focus is more on the Kavim Tzoy itself, but on the other hand, the Sefer Bereshis also has Kavim, the story of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. The difference is that in Sefer Bereshis, it's more like the Yichud of Ein Sof, the way it's in its source, in the Maitzil, in the emanator, the root of Atzilus, and the 4 books that follow is the Yichud Iskalus as it is in Atzilus. So it's not completely Bereshis, not completely removed, it's just the source of it all. Like he calls it Ein Sof HaMaitzil. Doesn't say before the Tzimtzum necessarily, because it means everything that's higher than Atzilus, the root, the source. In a sense, it's like a picture of God's mind. And Atzilus is a picture of God's structure, God's art, the creation itself. But both of them have an element of Kavem Tzoy. The question is the focus on the unifying element from the top, which is Sefer Bereshis, or is it the unifying element within existence? So the artist, you can look at the artist in 2 ways. You can look at the artist's mind, how he's envisioning his art, but you could also look at his art, and that's also a unified entity. His art is also one cohesive unit because it's created by that same artist. It's just 2 different stages. One is within existence, so to speak, within Atzilus, the Kavim, and one is the way it's in the mind, so to speak, or in the root and the source of the artist, using that example. And that's where we stopped. 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Now, this is all leading, before I continue reading, this is all leading us to understand the breakdown then, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, is going to take this principle of Chochma law, which is God's pure wisdom and pure clarity from the highest levels. In Torah, in Mikra itself, we've now distinguished between Sefer Bereshis and the other 4 books, and then show how that pure wisdom comes downward. In Mishnah, as we learned earlier, it's going to be the Chochma law radiates in a very transparent way into the Mishnah, but the Mishnah, even more than the 4 books of Mikra, are definitely bring it more into Seichel, into the Kavim of kosher, not kosher, because at the end of the day, Mikra, we learned, even the 4 books, not Bereshis. Bereshis for sure doesn't have mitzvahs, primarily. Even the 4 books, the mitzvahs are still very brief and without explanation. Mishnah is already developing it. So Mishnah is going to be the Chochmei law of Torah Shebiksav, which in Torah Shebiksav itself originates in Sefer Bereshis, is the highest level. And then it comes to the other 4 books. And then from there, it's going to radiate into the Chochma Tata, which is Chochma Tata of Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. That's Mishnah and Braisa. Gemara, Talmud, where there will say the Chochmei law does not radiate in it. There, what dominates is really the human effort of trying to understand God's wisdom, which is not Mepia Shmua Kabbalah, Ish Mepi Ish. That's going to be the Amoraim working. Obviously, working within the framework of Torah. It's still Torah. It's still Chochma Tata. But in Chochma Tata, you're going to have a Chochma Tata that's informed by and directly linked to the Ish Mepi Ish, like the flame from a flame, undiluted, with clarity, straight back to Hashem, as he gave the Torah at Sinai. And then Talmud is going to take it down to one more level into the human effort of understanding that, which in Torah itself is from the bottom up. So you see here that Chochmei law into Chochma Tata, and the Chochma Tata will also go through stages, through Mishnah, Braisa, and ultimately to Talmud. So the picture. At the end of the day, the picture that we're going to derive from this is that we have all elements. We have the Torah in its purest form. That's in the psukim of Torah itself, Torah Shebiksav, starting from Sefer Bereshis, traveling through all the stages, ultimately coming down into this world where us human beings can use our minds, with our effort and our exertion, to understand what God wants of us. And obviously the goal is to align the lowest parts all the way to the highest. But you have these stages that we're going to be discussing later. Not up to that yet. Right now, he went back to start with the MS of Torah, Chochmei law, and explaining the difference between in Mikra itself, between the first book, Bereshis, and the 4 books. That's what we're still in the middle of. Now, the next step is going to be that after Chochmah, Ilah comes, where is the Birur? Chochma is going to be, as we're going to learn now, is the Mavarer. Chochma gives us the ability for achieving clarity and separating and understanding what we're supposed to be doing with the world around us. But then the real Birur happens in Bina. And Bina is primarily in the world of Bria. That's where the Birurim. So we're going to soon learn this all as we go along. I just wanted to put it into context.
Is Bereshis higher than the Dalet Sforim?
We'll just read what the Rebbe Rashab just said. You tell me. I don't know what the word higher you mean by higher. It seems like it's a higher level. I mean, he just said it's called the Sefer HaYashar. That is the Kavem Tzoi. That's the L'mayla Mischalkus. I would think that Yichud the Erein Sof HaMaitzel Sheresh Atzilis is higher than Yichud V'Skalos HaKavim B'Atzilis. Just like higher than Atzilis is higher than Atzilis. So Bereshis is that level of Yichud the Erein Sof HaMaitzel Sheresh Atzilis V'Adalet Tzvarim or Yichud V'Skalos HaKavim B'Atzilis. That's the last line we just learned. That sounds to me like higher.
But by the way, today's Tanya is all about this. Today's portion of Tanya, I mean, I never understood it, but maybe I understand it a little better now.
About the Hagah and Perek Mem? What piece are you talking about? What chapter is it today?
No.
Okay.
It says, it's I just looking at Chayinu. It's in epistle 26.
Oh no. So I'm mistake. Right? Yeah. That's correct. I mentioned it. He mentioned it earlier. Ageres Akeda Simcha Chavav. He mentioned a few pages back. Yeah. I confused it. No, you're right. Right. Not the Tanya. In Perek Mem in the Haggai, he talks about Mikra Mishnah Talmud a bit. These levels. But you're right. Chavav is about the difference between Eitz HaChaim and Eitz HaDas. Like we learned earlier, the Birur of Eitz HaDas of Tersha. Yeah, there is Nigla and Primis HaTeira. Yeah.
In the Chires from yesterday, in the Tanya, he's talking about it, I think.
Yeah. That's what he said. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue.
Yeah, he says it's the Chenhu b'Harav Sefer HaKavana Shamikra v'Mishra Talmud v'Kabbalah Kulam Batzilus. Ela Shamikra Mislabesh ad Asiya, and it goes on. Mishnah ad Yitzir v'Talmud v'Bria.
That's in chapter 40. Is that what you're reading from?
No, it says 25.
25 where? In Ageres HaKedesh?
I think so. It doesn't explicitly say
fine. Okay. Fine. Okay, so let's continue. We're 6 lines from the bottom of page 1374.
Igeres Chav Vav.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
No, wait, Chav Chafei, it says here. Anyways, whatever.
Okay. V'zehu, just for the record, down below, they say a parenthesis begins here by the word v'zehu. A parenthesis that ends 3 lines from here. So just keep that in mind. This may be a parenthesis. So he says, so after saying that Torah is the Kavem Tzoy in general, and the 2 levels in that is the way it's in Sefer Bereshis and the 4 books, which is higher than Atzilus, the Sefer Bereshis, and there's the Yichud as it is higher than Atzilus, and then in Atzilus is the 4 books. So he says, V'zeu shemidas ha'emes. Remember, he began, all this is midas ha'emes, that Torah is midas ha'emes. He midoshe shel Yaakov. This is the meaning that when we say that the midah, the virtue, the attribute of truth is the attribute of Yaakov. Titen emes liYaakov. So we learn from that, emes liYaakov, give emes, truth to Yaakov. Because Yaakov associates with the Kavem Tzoy. Remember, Avram is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gvura, and who's Yaakov? Kavem Tzoy, emes. The emes of Torah that we're talking about. Torah Vedic Gmilas Chasadim, Gmilas Chasadim associated with Avram, Aveda Tefillah, Pachad Yitzchak is Gvura, left, and Yaakov is Teira, Kavem Tzoi. Ubi Yaakov Ksiv, Yaakov Ish Tom. So it says in Pasha Teldes, Yaakov was Ish Tom, the wholesome one, Yeshev Aholim, the dweller of tents. What is Tom? Sheyat Tom ve'emes. Tom comes from a word like Tomim, complete, wholesome, innocent, pure. But Tom ve'emes. So that's when you say Yaakov was.
Pesach means simpleton.
Not with Yaakov, no. Yeah. V'hu liyes keilu kol hakavim. That is because Yaakov, emes, encompasses all the kavim, all the paths, all the pillars, right, left, center. Shezo amitis emes. That is the truth of emes. When you say something is true, it's not just true in one area. It's true in all areas. So it really encompasses everything. When you say chesed, you'll say in the world of chesed, these are the rules. In the world of gvura is the rules of gvura. But when it comes to teferes emes, emes is true everywhere. That's why it says in Yerushalmi, why is emes, midas emes, is emes, because emes consists of 3 letters. Aleph, Mem, Sof. The first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Tov, Sof, and Mem is exactly the 11th letter, right in between, in the middle. Why? Because Emes is not just true in one area, it's true through and through. Like Kavem Tzoi, it runs from the beginning, through the middle, through the end. In some Sfarim, it says that Sheker, which is the antithesis of truth, is lie, is letters Shin, Kuf, Reish, the next to last 3 letters of the alphabet. They all sit near each other. Kuf, Reish, Shin, in the reverse order. Shin, Kuf, Reish. Why? Because Sheker ein le raglayim. Sheker does not have any feet to stand on. So that's why lies congregate near each other. They don't have the confidence to spread out. Thieves congregate together because each lie needs another lie to support it. Emes is confidence. So the Aleph can be here, the Mem here, and the Saf here, because Emes is everywhere. Sheker has no feet of its own, so it needs to support each other. That's why one lie always brings another lie. Just pointing that out. But getting back to Emes, Emes is all-encompassing. It says it also in Tanya, in Perikut Gimel, that Yaakov is Emes. That's Kavem Tzoi. V'shorshe mebchinas Chochma shenikra Emes. And the root of it is Chochma, like you said on top, which is called Emes. So Chochma radiates the truth of God, the pure truth. So if you want to really know what is the truth of existence, not just the scientific truths like what are the molecules or atoms or other things that make up the building blocks of existence, but the highest truth, which is the purpose of the creator in the creation, that's in Chochma, that's called Emes, and that's Torah. In Torah itself, we learn now the difference between Sefer Bereshis and the 4 books. In the Emes itself, there's levels, meaning levels of the Kavim Tzoi. Is it going into the Kavim of mitzvahs, like in the 4 books, or is it still in the source before Atzilus in Bereshis? Which, as he said, is more like the Sheirish Shemokar HaTeira, K'moishi L'maylam is Chalkus Kavim. Even though it also manifests in Kavim, because Sefer Yashar also talks about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But the focus there is more that unifying truth of Torah. Okay.
Why is Chochma Emes?
First of all, to just quote the Tanya in chapter 35 in the Haggadah, he says, Shemaiti Memeri, that in Chochma radiates, Hu levade ve'ein zulase. Because Chochma, the Nekudas HaChochma, carries the truth of all wisdom, which is that there's only God, there's nothing else. Bina is already an understanding of it, so it's coming down into the garments, into the levushim of Havana Vasoge. Chochma is the emes, the Nekudas Emes, pure Nekudas Emes. So in Atzilus itself, Chochma is the first step, is the spark. Chochma ma'ayin timotze. Chochma carries the emes havaya le'elam, like he said on the top of the page. If you look on top, he said, Shatei nikre emes, and then he says, and if you say b'chochma deteri chochma berura be'etzem, b'chinas chochma law. So the second point I'd make is that chochma is a chochma berura. In chochma, you have the pure truth of something. And which is the purest truth of all truths is the chochma of Torah. So that's what he says. See the third line, first few lines on top of the paragraph. Now you could of course ask, is Yaakov Tiferes? What's Tiferes? Is it Chochma or is it Tiferes? So the answer is Tiferes is the so-called the midah. In the Kavim, it's the Kavim Tzoy. Chochma, in truth, is really the Kav Yamin. Chochma is Yamin, Bin is Smoil. That's a discussion of its own that maybe requires, I don't want to go into that right now. Here, the point in Chochma is not so much as Yamin, but Chochma is higher than structure. It's not yet coming into Kavim altogether. So Chochma is like higher than structure in that sense. Chochma law of the Eibishter. So basically is this, God's truth is higher than everything. It's higher than wisdom too. But the Eibishter wanted his truth to be manifest in a way that we can access it. So he created Chochma, wisdom, like I've explained many times. Chochma is not just, its primary role is not intelligence. It's actually truth. It's to give us a sense of a higher truth. Midays are emotional, subjective, and emotions are subjective. So you're never going to get from your feelings an objective truth, because feelings by definition is what's in it for me. How do I feel about it? I'm not talking about necessarily that it's bad, but it's subjective. Wisdom, on the other hand, intelligence, healthy intelligence, not emotions that affect your intelligence. But a healthy intelligence should be an objective observer that reflects on something and is looking for the truth of it, not what is in it for me. As soon as midas affects wisdom or intelligence, you're not going to get an objective picture. But the true role of intelligence is God wanted a bridge between his pure emes, what is the truth of everything, but in our world. So he gave us a mind, and he created wisdom, and specifically, namely Chochma, the beginning of all wisdom, because he wanted Ayin Timotzi, he wanted to take the Ayin, the emes of God's truth, and he wanted to put it into a reality that we can access. And how do we access it? Because we have minds. We have objective minds. So the truth is, the purpose of the mind is not just to understand. The purpose of the mind is to find the truth. Find the truth. And that goes even beyond intelligence. So the role of intelligence is to find the truth. And therefore, in Chochma Bina Das, the one where that is most captured is the first step, Chochma. So Chochma therefore has Hulavade Ve'en Zulase, like he says in Tanya. I'm just explaining an idea that we've talked about many times. It's a very central theme in Ayin Beis, because in the interface of things, Chochma plays a tremendous role, because it's the bridge between the super-conscious Chochma Stima and Keser, and that which is higher than Keser, and the rest of the spheres. It's the bridge. That's why in Tanya, chapter 2, Chochma plays such an important role. What does he say there? That the neshama comes from Chochma. Huva Chochma says there, he says, like from Moyach Ha'av. Bonim Atem, the ben comes from the Etzem Moyach Ha'av. That's Chochma, because the Eibishter Huva Chochma Se'echad. God and his Chochma are one, and that is the root of all neshamas. But neshamas really are rooted even higher. But Elikus, the first step where it manifests in structure is in Chochma. In the context of Torah, that's Bereshis. Actually, the word Bereshis itself, B'chuchmase. What does Rashi say? And the Targum, Bereshis means B'chuchmase, because Chochma is Reshis. Reshis Chochma, Yiras Hashem. So the word Bereshis itself is Chochma, actually. Chuchmasa. But Chuchmasa is not just God's wisdom, it's God's truth. Truth manifests in objective wisdom, which then is elaborated upon in Bina, and then further develops as it manifests in Midas. Midas would be already the Kavim, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. So in a way you could say that Bereshis is the level of Chochma, just an akuda that's higher than, which manifests the Maitzil, that's higher than Atzilus. And then the 4 books is how that unity comes into the Kavim of Chesed and Gvura, like you said, the mitzvahs of the Kavim of the structure. That's another way of elaborating upon it more. He's actually going to say now that what I just said in different words. So to continue, so that was a parenthesis, the last 3 lines. The koyach ma, the chochma, here we go. Chochma is made up of 2 words. Koyach ma. You look at the words chochma as 4 letters. Ches chof, that's koyach, reversed. And then ma, the koyach of what? Of ma. Ma is bittul. So he says, the chochma b'chinas nekuda. Chochma is a nekuda, it's a spark. She nekuda se'emes is the kernel or the spark of truth. K'moishi be'etzem hadover, as it is in the very core of something. So like if you were thinking about, let's say, a tree, and you want to know what is the essence of this tree, you need to find the seed. It's an apple tree, so the seed of the tree is the apple seed. Then you know that's the core that tells you the whole, what it encompasses. The tree itself is already a full-blown tree. So nekudas k'moshi be'etzem hadover u'pnimiyusei, and its inner dimension, v'tamtzis u'mufcher hadover, and a tamtzis, like a summary or a concentration of and mufchar, and the best of that product. So in every item, when you look at something, you can see there's the let's call it the external features or the external expression of it, and then there's nekudas hadover. Like when someone gives a speech or writes an article or a book, someone will tell me in 1 word what was the punchline, or what was the headline, what is the main key kernel of the idea. That would be Chochma. Bina, of course, develops it. But the Nekudas ha'emes, that's why Chochma is so critical. Chassidus sometimes brings that when you develop an idea into details, which is Bina, you always have to connect it to Nekudas ha'emes of Chochma, the point of departure. Why? Because if not, you can go the language of Chassidus, b'derech ha'klosen. You can wander off, fablungen. You can get lost in the details. That's why you find, I always, whenever any talks I give, I always say, so you come up with an idea right away, write down what was your first kernel, the concept. Because once you start breaking it down and fleshing it out, very often people say, where did we begin? You know, you can go so far off. But when you connect the details to Chochma, that's why you need someone in every company who's maintaining the vision of the company before you get into all the details. Because when you get into details, you can easily wander off and lose sight of what was the purpose of it all. You know, it's like going on a journey and you start traveling and traveling and traveling. You forget, why did we go on this journey in the first place? You have to always know the point of departure. So Chochma retains essentially the kernel, essence of it all. But of course, Chochma alone is not enough because Chochma is just an essence. You want to now develop it. So that's the Nekudas HaChochma. He explains himself now why that's called emes. L'chein Omar b'Zohar. Is that clear? Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything before I read the next line. Okay, L'chein Omar b'Zohar, and that's why he says in Zohar, Isa b'Zohar, I should say. L'chein Isa b'Zohar, and that's why it says in the Zohar, the b'chochma dafke is beriru. It's clearly missing a word, so down below in the footnote they clarify. So the expression is b'chochma is beriru. With chochma you clarify. It's an interesting expression. Why do you need chochma to clarify? Lefi shehu borer be'etzem. Because chochma itself is it's like when you have a confused situation. Let's say you have a lot of things going on in your company or in your life, and you bring a chacham, an outside person who comes who's a wise person, he looks at all the details and says, this thing is very disorganized, and tells you, here's how you should order it. Here's how you should organize it. Because Chochma is borer be'etzem. Chochma is the level of absolute and essential clarity. Al kein yesh beikeach levar kol taruvas tevara. That's why Chochma is the best instrument to come to clarify, separate the mixes of Tevara. How do you separate? Like when you come to a Rav and you say, I have here a question. A piece of meat fell into a pot of milk, or whatever the question is, or other things. What's a Rav going to do? He uses the Chochma Satera and his Chochma to make clarity here, to separate. Let's distinguish between the different points until we get total clarity. So in other words, within Chochma radiates the power of total clarity of emes of Hashem. That's the punchline here. That's why Teira's emes starts with Chochma. Chochma Satera, in other words. So the wisdom of Teira at its best is going to give you clarity, absolute clarity on any given issue. And this clarity is the emes, the truth of Chochma. We're on top of page 1375. It has the power to clarify, separate all the mixtures and all the compositions of Tevara. Let's explain Taruvas Tevara. It says before Chet Eitz Hadas, when God created the world, there was a very clear separation between what was good and what was not. The world in which we live today is that we are not always clear what is good, what is not good. Sometimes it snowballs, very often that it's a combination of both. We live in a world where it's a mix, like when you take a piece of food. So he says in Tanya, this food is klipas nega. What does that mean? On one hand, it has a spark of the divine, like everything comes from godliness. On the other hand, it's concealed somewhat. Not sholosh klipas hatmeyas, that's off limits. Klipas nega, a radiant klippa, but it's still a klippa. And what can happen? You could either eat the food l'shem shamayim and elevate it, or, God forbid, you could eat it self-indulgent and give into the klippa part. It's almost like focusing more on the peel than on the divine spark within. So it's a taruvas of tevara, meaning it can go this way, it can go that way. So we live in a world where tevara are not purely identified. Someone has to identify. That's why we have a tevara. That's why we call it birur, birur halacha, or avedas habirurim. We learned earlier about mishnayos. Kosher or is it not kosher? Is this korban allowed to be offered or not allowed to be offered? Is this thing tameh or toher, pure, impure, or pure? Is it kosher or posel? Isur v'heter. Is it allowed or is it not allowed? This is all called birur. That's why you say by Rabban, birur hadvarim, birur halacha. It's clarifying, crystallizing. How do you crystallize? How do you clarify? That's with Chochma. That's the Chochma of Teira. The emes of Chochma allows you to do that because Chochma is fundamentally a state of clarity. If you went into the world of Chochma, all you have is God's clarity. That's all you have. The problem is we don't live in the world of Chochma. We live in the world of Elam Asiyah, in a world where there's Tevara and Taruv is Tevara. And we don't always know what's right and what's wrong. There's two paths. Is this right? Now, sometimes we know it's very clear. Sometimes it's not clear. So the Torah comes to clarify that for us. In general, we didn't get into the details of Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, but that's what Torah is. Like he started, that was the whole Birur Inyan. He's explaining the emes of Torah. That Torah is ein Torah, ein emes ala Torah. Torah is called Torah's emes. Now we understand is the level of Chochma, is Birur that clarifies, because Chochma fundamentally is a state of clarity. And now he brings it back finally to Yaakov. Remember, Yaakov is this level, emes. Uke Yaakov shoya ish tam, the emes. Like Yaakov, who is a wholesome, complete, and truthful person of integrity, Lavan was cunning. Ramos was cunning, shrewd, conniving. Ramos is fooling. He lies. He was a liar. Like he did the fooling of Yaakov when marrying Leah, instead replacing Rachel with Leah, and other things that he kept on fooling. He was a ish ramoi, which means a crook, basically, a swindler. Another word for it. And what was Yaakov's role? It was to be mavarer the Ramois, to counter that sheker, that conniving spirit, that conniving what's the word? What did I call it before? thievery of Lavan. Yaakov was the counterforce to that Ishtam Yoshev Olin. That was Mavader that, because he was the level of MS of Teferes that's rooted in Chochma.
Yaakov said he's a bigger Ramai than Lavan. If he needs, he's a bigger Ramai than Lavan because that's MS.
Yeah, but the point here is he brought truth in this world of cunning. There's another word I was looking for. Not cunning. Okay, so we'll stop here. This paragraph, as you see, the next paragraph is going to say, this is the mavarer. Chochma is the one that does the clarification. But what are we clarifying? Where's the world of Birur itself? Mokemam is barer. He's going to now go on and say that's bina after we explain Chochma. But I'm going to stop here before the next paragraph. Any questions, please? Or comments or queries? Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. By the way, I see I skipped the last line of last page. Let me read it again.
You don't want to say anything.
Okay. So Lechein Isa B'Zoyar, the B'Chochma Dafke is Beriru. I got so caught up in this Beriru, I forgot to read the next line. Lefisha Kol Dover Atzorach Birur, everything that needs clarification and separation, Bein Teiv V'Ra, between good and evil. You need to know, is this a right thing? Is it wrong? Shemu'urav Sheker V'Emes, where there's a combobulated mixture of this lie and truth. Like, every court of law is doing that. And I sometimes marvel how much money is spent, how much time just trying to get to the story, the actual story, bring witnesses. There's someone that knows what happened, but they're lying. So the whole point of real judgment and a real court of law is to find out what's sheker and what's emes. So Ayin Beis, this clarification is not possible or doesn't exist. Only Chochma has that power. Lefishahu Birur be'etzem. I continue that. So this line I skipped, sorry. This Birur is only Chochma. That's Chochma is Birur. So Chochma gives us that power because Chochma itself is a state of Elikus coming into existence. So it's giving us the truth, the emes. That's Birur be'etzem. Alken yesh bekechi levar kol taruvas tevara. Yeah. I mean, I explained, I didn't read the line, but I did explain the idea of taruvas tevara. I just didn't want to skip a line.
That's
okay,
why
now we got it covered. Now we got it covered.
That's why
then he goes on. Yeah. So it's a beautiful way of looking. Torah is emes, trying to bring truth in a world that is unfortunately not always so truthful. Okay, so we stop at the end of the paragraph, top second line on page 1375. Any questions, comments, anything? Yeah. Really nice. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here, top of page 13.